Who are you? Beneath the expectations, the labels, and the societal conditioning, what does it truly mean to become you? I'm John Fleming, the founder and lead practitioner of Becoming You. I created Becoming You out of a desire to share my own experience of becoming myself and to support others who are curious about who they are. From a young age, I have been driven by a desire to figure out who I am, why I'm here, and how I can belong while being myself. This is Becoming You, the podcast. Conversations about uncovering, embracing, and being your true self. A place where I dive deep into what it means and what is required to live life as your most authentic self. Through real, honest, and grounded conversations with professionals and people who are walking the path. If you're curious about identity, authenticity, and personal freedom, your own or others, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Would you like to say a few words to introduce yourself and tell people who you are?
Sure. I love this opportunity to say exactly what I want to say. I am an autistic ADHDer. That's probably a main thing. That's my headline that I go with now. Late diagnosed and discovering who I am. And I suppose the thing that gives me focus is the question, who am I really? I'm in my 50s now, so I've had a lot of time to be alive. I've been alive in different ways, and who am I is an evolving discovery. I'm also an occupational therapist. I use internal family systems, and that is one of the ways actually that I have discovered who I am really. And it's sort of my special interest.
It's a good special interest to have. I have to admit, IRS is a little bit of a special interest for me as well. So I have a question for you from the last guest. And the question is, how do you know you're living a fulfilled life?
How do I know I'm living a fulfilled life? I think I can feel it in my body. So like when you asked me that question, my body got warm in a sense of like zinging or sort of energy and excitement. It's a felt sense for me. And also the thing that came up was a remembering of what it felt like when I wasn't living a fulfilled life. And that memory was like a feeling of maybe hopelessness or deadened, or every time I would turn towards something that I needed or wanted or I liked, it would sort of shut down in some way. So what I notice now is that when I am interested in something or I like a person, it's more accessible to me somehow. So I'm surrounded by experiences that I love, whether that's my work, whether that's my client work, whether it's the friends that I've made since my diagnosis, whether it's to do with living in Ireland when I'm not from Ireland. It's like the great joy of the greenery and the seasons and the intersection of so many different things. That's how I know, the felt sense of all that coming together.
That's lovely. In the episode before last, I spoke to Kamla about being you in your body. So we talked a lot about embodiment, and that's kind of reminded me back to that again, is that often actually fulfillment isn't a cognitive thing. So I really get that actually, and I'd never seen it from that way before, because I think anytime people have asked me about fulfillment, I've thought, well, I've got this, or I can name that, or I've achieved that goal, which for me feels quite cognitive. But to connect below my neck and think, do I really feel it in my body, is a whole other experience.
Yeah, and I'll say like it's new for me. I've probably only, I don't remember what year I entered autistic burnout. It might have been 22 or maybe 23. It was only after that I learnt that my body was something that was an ally or a friend, or it could support me. It could communicate with me. It could tell me what was right and what was wrong. It's been the most extraordinary journey. So yeah, I'm very grateful. Really fucking grateful, I have to say. If I had to go through burnout to get this, I would do it again and again and again, because it's such a gift.
Oh, I really feel that.
Yeah, you can hear in my voice maybe that I'm feeling emotional about it, because it's a great joy.
I'm very moved by what you're sharing, Sarah, because I have my own experience of that as also being late diagnosed ADHD and autistic and having had cycles of burnout in my life, that I feel like I've got to a place in my relationship with who I really am
Mm,
that's so precious that I think like
mm.
I don't know if I would go back and do it differently actually.
That's a
You
big
know.
deal because I'm sure I'm not alone in there's some shit that has gone down. Like whatever about burnout, there is some serious traumatic shit that's gone down in my life. So I really feel the gravitas of what you just said there.
Yeah, I always say to people when I'm working with them that becoming you is not necessarily a really nice and pleasant thing all of the time. Yeah.
No, I still remember when I started doing my trauma work. So really, really seeing the things that were traumatic, and it started to feel worse. And the person I was working with at the time had to say to me, yes, it is going to feel worse before it gets better, because I had lived with this idea that always seeking ease, seek ease, seek ease. And the idea that going the right way felt worse was just so opposite.
That resonates strongly with me. Yeah, definitely. Like I'm all about becoming you and inviting bliss and joy and all of these wonderful things that we enjoy all of the time. But just dark follows day or night follows day, there will always be a shadow. There will always be the bits that we don't like as much. And for me, those are equally as important. I really dislike it when people label things like sadness and anger and fear as negative emotions because I'm like, no, 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 no. Why are we putting a judgment on them? They're just all emotions and we need all of them to function optimally.
Yeah.
So, Sarah, I really wanted to ask you more about who you've been becoming in your life.
Well, I mean, the first thing is an autistic ADHDer, and it was ADHD first. My sister would call ADHD the gateway diagnosis, like our gateway drug, and that was absolutely the case for me. Once ADHD became sort of part of my, oh yeah, that's who I am, then my autism just like blossomed. So that's definitely who I'm becoming. And in fact, yeah, I'm becoming someone who is more comfortable with their sensory needs. I'm becoming someone who can advocate for themselves. I'll just give you an example. So I have this sign, it usually sits here. It says reserved and it has my name. And it's a symbol to me that when I was it was a big sort of seminar thing, 1,800 people a week ago in Edinburgh, that I had emailed ahead and told them I was autistic and that I can't sit in a chair. Right? And so they saved me a spot where I could use my yoga mat and I could sit on the floor for it. That is the most extraordinary thing. If Sarah, even 5 years ago, heard me say that, she would not have believed that was possible. That sort of sense of being an advocate for myself. So I'm becoming that. I'm becoming a person who can follow pleasure, actually. And that will probably tie into what we're going to talk about later on related to sex and sexuality, but like really valuing what makes my body generally feel good and learning not to be apologetic for that, learning to create space for it within me as well as in my life. What else am I becoming? I'm becoming an internal family systems therapist that is really fucking good at working with autistic ADHDers. The more and more experience I get of that, the more appreciative I am of how important it is for us all to have access to therapists or practitioners that share our lived experience in some way. Can't overstate that enough. That's been a game changer for me.
Super important, I think, for the neurodiverse community. I compare it, although I'm not sure that this has entirely changed, but I do think it has changed a little bit. There was a time when people from the LGBT community would only see therapists or professionals in that arena, maybe doctors, things like that, who were also had lived experience. And I do think that has moved on a bit, not for everybody, but I definitely noticed that with like the younger generation are not as bothered about who they go and see, because for them they've grown up in a more accepting, homogenous, inclusive community. But I think for at the moment for the neurodiverse community, we're very much where the LGBT community was 20 years ago, where it's like, no, if you're not working with somebody with lived experience, that's going to be creating a massive headache for you.
I love hearing you reflect that back to me, because it just reminds me that, oh, I'm still in that point where I need someone to say to me, you're right to feel that. Because when you just said that, I was like, oh, good. It was almost like a relief. It's like, oh, thank goodness I'm not on my own with this.
And it might not change for some people either, you know, because I think that lived experience with neurodiversity is so important to really understanding what people go through. It's not impossible if you're neurotypical, but we could get into a whole debate about whether neurotypical is a reality or not anyway. So the other thing that I really loved that what you said a while ago, though, is when you pulled out that reserve sign, I just thought, oh my God, it's so great that you have that with you. And that you are advocating for yourself. What a beautiful thing to be able to do.
Yeah. And you know what? I think I'm in the place where I can feel the beauty of it. Even 6 months ago, I wouldn't have been able to feel the beauty, because it would have been just effort, fear, worry. Like, am I making a big deal out of nothing? Will they think I'm like, even the idea of sitting on the floor, everyone will think I'm a weirdo, you know? So to have been able to find my way through that, to be unapologetically myself and with my needs, has been wonderful. And I will say, like, I know that I'm having this conversation with you now, and in 2 years' time, I'm going to maybe listen back to this and go, oh, Sarah, there are so many things you didn't even know then. So this is absolutely a work in progress.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, acknowledging and accounting for evolution is so important, because I'm the exact same, where I, you know, look at things I thought or perspectives I had and go, oh, how things have changed. Yeah. You have to hold everything lightly, I feel, because the world moves so quickly and we are evolving. Definitely. So Sarah, we're here to talk generally about the theme of sex and sexuality in relation to how that informs your identity and who you are. I have a little bit of background of working with sexuality and particularly sexual health, but I know you have quite a lot of experience at working in that area. So I'm really keen to hear your perspective on it in relation to identity.
How about I just start with, it's not just actually, it's sort of the foundation of why I got into that work, because it's very much about becoming. So when I was growing up, obviously didn't know I was autistic, was raised by undiagnosed neurodivergent, definitely at least one autistic parent. In retrospect, all my siblings are autistic ADHDers. So growing up in that environment meant that there were lots of things that happened that didn't set me up in life. One of them was that even though my mum was a nurse and would talk openly about things related to sex and bodies and babies, I think it was because I was ADHD. I don't remember. Like, it would have been at that have a conversation, move on, we've done that, tick the box. And so that got me into a lot of challenging situations. The least one was when I was 9, talking to my friend Libby, who was 10, much more worldly wise than me. And I was asked, like, how did a sperm get to an egg? And I thought they flew through the air, you know, like the deep shame of being 9 and your 10-year-old friend laughing at you because something's like completely wrong. So it was sort of that, at that time, I was a person who didn't have a lot of information about that part of being human, right? So it didn't really hit me as important until I started to have children of my own, where I became really aware that I was not going to let that happen to the kids in my care. And as is my want, because neurodivergent special interest, I dove deep and discovered how important it is to educate kids in just an everyday basic way, from pretty much from when they're born, but definitely from the age of 2. I did my master's in sexuality, and that was the beginning of it. in retrospect, I now see that I was a queer person who had never had any role models or language around that. So didn't have any understanding that there was anything other than opposite sex attraction, had no understanding that gender is purely a construct. And so if I look back, there are all these moments in time that were showing me who I was, but they didn't, I didn't understand that. Like my first crush on a woman, you know, like I didn't know it was a crush. I just thought I really, really, really liked her because she was so like effervescent. It's clearly more than that now in retrospect. Or not liking gendered language and not understanding what that actually meant. So being in this work is absolutely related to the journey of becoming for me. I always was who I was, but it's growing into a sense of understanding and appreciation and acceptance and celebration. That's what it's been. And my work was, particularly when we're working mainly in sexuality education, helping adults who have some responsibility for children who are growing up, children and young people, being an asset to those young people rather than a hindrance. And as I'm talking to you about that, I feel a sense of like excitement, because even though I'm not working in that full time now, it is a deep passion, because I know how effing important it actually is to set people up on a journey so they can become who they are.
If these episodes have been sparking curiosity in you about your own identity, then I've got just the thing to support your exploration. Download your free copy of Becoming You, the workbook, in PDF format today. It's packed with information about uncovering, embracing, and being yourself, including self-led exercises, reflection prompts, and resources, all designed to support you in diving deeper and exploring your identity. Find the link in the show notes to download your free copy now. No, totally. I mean, me too. I feel very passionate about it. I have not dove as deep into it as you have, but I have, you know, kind of skimmed the outskirts of it, let's say, with really looking in and saying that's something that's important and needs something that needs to be accounted for. And I think of my own growing up experience, and I think on the grand scheme of things, for a young boy growing up in rural Ireland, coming from a predominantly farming community, I got a lot of input, and it still wasn't enough or the right sort of input. So I think that's another thing to account for as well, is that we need to think about how it's done and the quality of it. So like, I got given a book, first of all, which it like, I just still remember the conversation of my mum being like, I need to talk to you. She chose a time where my father wasn't around. It was just icky. The book was like black and white illustrations, which were really hard to make out what I was really looking at. I now know I'm dyslexic, have ADHD and autism. I don't read. So I didn't fucking read the book. I stuck it at the back of my bedside locker and hoped it would go away, or that I would never be asked about it ever again. My father took a different approach. We grew up on a dairy farm, so he took me to look at a bull having sex with a cow, and was basically like, can you see what's happening there? That was actually much more informative, but very traumatizing for me.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I don't want to be having this conversation with you, Dad. We're looking at a bull's penis being inserted into a cow's vagina.
And how old were you when you were shown that?
Oh, I don't know. I was quite young. He also said something really wrong, which is, I shouldn't really be showing you this. So then it was immediately, I was shamed, because it was like, oh, we shouldn't be looking at this. Whereas I look back now and I just think, how normal.
That's right. And in fact, how lucky you were to have access to something so like biological, you know?
Yeah. And then in school, I just happened to go to a school in transition year where they brought the Sexual Health Centre in transition year. The Sexual Health Centre is a not-for-profit charity in Cork City. And they came in for 2 full days of sex ed, which like in 2006 or whenever it was unheard of in Irish schools. And that's the sexual health centre I went on to work in when I was an adult. So you can see how actually it really had a positive impact on me. And even then, Sarah, with all three of those interventions under the age of 17, I still feel like there was so many things where I was like, what is that? Why don't I understand it? I feel really isolated with this, very lonely. I don't understand how I'm becoming a man, on and on and on and on and on.
And that makes me think about maybe even this unexamined idea that many of us might have about like that where we're trying to get to is a full understanding of ourselves that reduces difficulty or questions or worry. And maybe this idea of becoming really does involve, as horrible as this is going to sound, challenges and, to use a sort of a Buddhist word, a bit of suffering. I hate saying that. Because it goes against everything I believe in, but also it doesn't at the same time. Like if I think about, I had a relationship that had an element of coercive control in it, related to, in fact, a psychologist. So this would have been back in the 90s in Melbourne, in Australia. A psychologist that I had a professional relationship with. What I learned from that, as I've been going through my trauma journey, is just mind-blowing. I am not saying that I would want anyone to experience some of the traumatic, abusive things that I have experienced. What I am saying, though, is that in my life, only my life, everyone's different, I am now at a place where I can see, wow, the lessons I've learned from that, the awareness I have. Like I have a lived experience of that statistic about autistic people and the increased likelihood of having some sort of sexual trauma or sexual abuse. Like I'm a lived example of that. So what that allows me to do, I suppose, is be with that in others in a way that I hope feels deeply understanding, like on a cellular lived experience level. And I know this conversation is probably getting maybe a bit dark and a little bit challenging, but I think it's really important for us to have conversations around humans experience shitty things. And we still live in a culture that maybe has trouble talking about it openly, which isn't that great, really.
Yes, I agree with that. And like I said earlier about night following day, that's also a reality when it comes to talking about sex and sexuality, because it's a very broad topic. And sure, we could have a conversation that's very nice. We talk about people really becoming who they are in terms of expressing themselves sexually and becoming comfortable with their own bodies in that way and how they function and their identity. But of course, on the other side of that are things like sexual abuse, sexual assault, and sexual harassment. And they need to be accounted for because they impact who we become in those spheres. And I just think of Ireland in particular with the scandal we have in the church here that often gets discounted, swept under the rug, not fully appreciated. I think about all the many, many young women and girls who were pregnant and put in laundries, and that would have impacted their sexuality and their relationship with themselves sexually.
Yeah.
And that has intergenerational impacts then as well.
So true. I was actually just thinking there as you were talking that just because we don't have an experience of what you and I are talking about in our lifetime doesn't mean we're not impacted by it if it's happened above us in our ancestral line. Like some of the work that I'm doing now in internal family systems, there really is a lot of opportunity to see what happened in a parent's life or a grandparent's life or a great-grandparent's life even that has created sort of knowing or ways of being or mantras, like truths that our family just says. One of mine is Sprouls are strong in the back and weak in the head, which now in retrospect I realize comes from having dyslexia run all the way back, ADHD running all the way back, which absolutely impacted a lot of people in my family's ability to learn. And so when we're just like 3, 4, or 5, to be living with that sort of saying, that impacts us. And the same with some of the people I've worked with in the past related to adults who are trying to support growing young people, that if they have had an experience of non-consent or their parent did, that it shapes even the access they have to words like penis and vulva, for example, or clitoris or orgasm or masturbation. Our access to language is shaped by history, the land we live on. It's the most extraordinary, mind-blowing thing, I think, that we don't exist just as individuals. We live in this soup of culture, and often culture can be steeped in shame.
And when you think of shame, for me anyway, it's so closely related to sex and sexuality often. Now, I may have a slightly skewed version on that as a gay man, because of course there's a lot of, I had to challenge a lot of shame around being gay in Ireland when I was growing up. But it is connected, and I think people get shamed for expressing their sexuality as well. You know, people say things like, oh, cover yourself up, or don't, you know. There's always debates in my friend circles about PDA, and people seem to be very opinionated about what other people shouldn't be doing in public. And I just think, why are we even having this conversation? Like, why do you care whether people kiss in public or not? Like, if they want to kiss, let them kiss. If they don't, that's their business. But having like a stance on it, you know, whether PDA is something that should be allowed or not allowed, feels so oppressive and unneeded.
Yeah, it just reminds me of how impacted we are, even if we're doing a really beautiful job of accepting ourselves and learning about like masturbation, for example, using masturbation as a way to sort of learn about what our body likes and what our body doesn't like. And we're working hard on that. We might have bought ourselves a new masturbation aid, like a vibrator or something. If we're in environments where other people are making sort of snide or comments about self-pleasure in a way that like, oh, you wanker you, right? What does that say? Oh, it's like being a wanker is a bad thing. Well, being a wanker is actually a really great thing. To be able to come to partnered sex, if we choose to do that ever in our life, if we do, to come to it with a real strong grounding of like, my genitals like this sort of touch, or my genitals don't like any touch, they just like to watch something. Or, you know, it's such a gift to be able to give ourselves. And our culture doesn't necessarily support us to adopt that stance and unapologetically action it.
Agreed. And I think as well that there's tiers to this. So I know that as a gay man, I grew up in an environment after I was 16 in which there was certain spaces in which that sort of conversation would be the norm with other young gay men. It would have just been like, if you're not talking about it, they would have been like, what's wrong with
Why
you?
are you not?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was like, we're
wow.
very open here and that's the norm. And I often think like I lived in like this parallel universe. So like there were things that I absolutely would never discuss in front of whole groups of friends, family members, people in my community, because it would have brought about great shame for me. And then there was like this alternate universe, which is like, was all of the gay people I knew, which was like, once you're behind a closed door with them, it's like you talk whatever you want here with like total freedom.
So interesting, John. That's so interesting to me because it brings up this question about who we become. We become different things in different environments. And is that okay? Like, I want to say, yeah, it is actually. That is okay. That's the way we sort of navigate our worlds, because we've got these different subsections or different subcultures. Like, I've got a group of people that we love talking about online entrepreneurship. That would bore the pants off other people that I go dog walking with, for example.
Yeah.
So that is part of a human skill that we develop. What is appropriate for this environment? What is appropriate for other environments?
The other thing I'm thinking of as well is that I've experienced often, you know, not all cis people. And when I'm referring to cis people here, I think I'm referring to straight cis people in particular, where they say, "Oh well, I'm straight or I'm cis," as if like they don't have a sexual or gender identity because they are straight and cis. And I just think, oh, what a great shame, because of course you have a sexual identity and a gender identity, and it's beautiful. And I kind of want to invite them into the exploration of like, what is it like to be straight and cis for you? And what are the amazing things that you could explore there in relation to pleasure? And I wonder sometimes, has this kind of divide appeared between the queer and straight community, where sometimes straight people feel as though that sort of stuff isn't on the table for them because they're straight?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, because it goes back to what you were saying before about the permission given in the culture of gay people that you were part of, that if there is that permission giving in sort of straight cis culture, my brain is thinking about all these different aspects of that can actually close people down, because there's so many rigid rules. I'm just thinking about masculinity, for example, all the rigid rules in mainstream culture around how to be masculine. It has to look or feel or smell or sound a particular way. Such a really good point. And it's almost tragic. Well, it is tragic. And maybe this is where we get some intersectionality between straight cis culture, and then what if there are straight cis people that are actually neurodivergent? Like, what gifts does that bring? I'm thinking about sensory sensitivities, for example, and how sensory sensitivities or desensitizing, that impacts every aspect of our life, including our sexuality. So once a person maybe gets a diagnosis of autism, for example, and they've been straight and cis up to this point, and then they enter into that world of sensory profiles and how actually the fact that they've been smelling smells that other people can't smell, it's a thing, and they're not making it up. It's only a short leap then to be able to bring that into their sexual self or their sexual being, to like actually smell makes a big difference to me if I'm with a partner. And it's okay for that to be the case. And therefore, then how can I advocate for myself for that? Or sound, or, like listening to, there's these, we live in a great time at the moment. These wonderful audio erotica platforms like Fantasy and Dipsy. Now, I only know them because there are probably all different ones focused on different orientations. These ones are for gender queer people or women. And so you get to hear the sounds of sex or hear someone talking in a particular way that a person might find erotic. And it's just this whole other level of discovering our sexual selves. It is quite extraordinary. So I think back to your point that there needs to be another intersection to be able to free up someone who is stuck in the cis hetero prison. That's what I think.
I find that so fascinating. Like, I feel like we've just cracked a nut in this conversation, because I'm just thinking, right? So, in dealing with your internalized ableism or your internalized homophobia or, all the other things that society and culture throws at you in growing up, it's a process. It doesn't just happen. You don't just go to 10 sessions of therapy and it's like, great, I've sorted that out now, move on. And like many people, it took me a long time to resolve my internalized homophobia. And I don't even really know if it's fully gone, but I'm in a really good place. I'm like, great, I feel comfortable. I never cringe now about saying I'm gay out loud. There was a time I would say it because I'd force myself to say it, but internally I'd be like, ugh, I can't believe I've just identified myself in that way. And one of the things that I've struggled with for quite some time was feeling like I was part of the gay community. Because there was lots of things about the gay community that just didn't work for me, that I felt like were hypocritical, disrespectful. Gay men can be the absolute worst to each other, which just seems crazy in a minority group, but they can really eat each other up and treat each other badly. And I'm making some massive generalizations here, but it's common acceptance that that's usually the case. Most gay men will agree that that's their experience. So when I found out I was autistic, one of the things was I really didn't like being queer. Okay? I didn't identify as queer. I didn't like people saying I was queer. When I was growing up, being called a queer was the worst insult you could be called. So it never sat right with me. But being gay or being homosexual, which was very factual, that was fine. When I found out that I was autistic and ADHD, all of a sudden I was like, I am queer all day long.
Yes.
And it was like you said, which was the intersection and understanding my sensory preferences. And there was so many things about autistic people. Like justice is such a big thing for lots of autistic people, and feeling like people are treated fairly and in the right way. That really jives with what goes on in the gay male community sometimes. So I was able to make sense of all of these things in another way. It was like I had another lens. And then I said to my friend, I'm neuroqueer.
Yeah.
That is who I am.
Thank you for sharing that, John. It's like something unlocked, isn't it? It's like you're permission to use particular language because of new layer of way of seeing yourself. I was just thinking about how I'm part of a number of different WhatsApp groups, as I'm sure everyone else is. So I'm in my internal family systems therapy community, right? And we have all these specialist WhatsApp groups. We have one for neurodivergent people and one for queer people. And I'm in the neurodivergent and the queer one. And people that are interested in social justice and people that are in decolonization of therapy and all these different identities. And what I notice is that there are some that draw me that I sort of feel more, like I feel more comfortable hanging out in. And for me, that's the neurodivergent one. It's almost like my primary, it's the hook from which all other identities hang. It's the one I come back to as the one that explains the most to me why I am the way I am and why I experience the world the way I experience it, particularly in relation to other humans. And I know there are people in that neurodivergent WhatsApp group who actually relate more to our rainbow queer group. And that feels like the place where all their other identities hang. So it's been really interesting for me to see that and to be okay with, I'm allowed to feel more comfortable in the neurodivergent group. I don't have to feel equally comfortable in all these. It's okay. And that is only something I've come to in the last 2 weeks. So that's pretty fresh. So in terms of becoming, it's a constant process of discovery and acceptance. Acceptance, because just because I discover something about myself and about my sexuality too, it doesn't mean that I accept it. That's another little piece of work. Oh, I'm like this. Oh, I like that sort of touch or that sort of sound, or is that okay? And the process goes on and on.
Sarah, somebody's listening into this right now and they're thinking, oh my God, I've never really explored my sexuality. They may be straight and cis, for example, or they may not be, but maybe it's just something that's kind of, it's a reality for them, but they may not have done any exploration of it. And they might be thinking, ooh, maybe that could be something I would do, or I'd like to do a workbook or read a book or do a short course. What would be your top tip for people who it might be quite fresh, this idea of exploring who you are sexually?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never been asked that question before, John. So I would start off with giving myself experiences that I haven't had before as an opportunity to investigate. So I'm coming from the, rather than course, workbook, cognitive, I'm going to body. I'm going to body.
I love that.
Right. So what does my body respond to? And that could be something as simple as this is going to, I'm just really, I feel embarrassed about saying this, but there's this really awful sort of media at the moment. They're like micro movies. They're like really bad erotic sort of fiction. And they're in 1 minute increments. If your Instagram algorithm is anything like mine, you will be getting ads for these things. So it's like really bad acting about the tropes to do with romance or eroticism. So friends to enemies, for example, or he falls first, or, anyway, all these different sort of tropes. And they can be a very accessible, and you can keep it sort of under wraps, way to discover, do I like to see this? What does my body do if I see or hear the sounds of dirty talk, for example, or someone using handcuffs? Like, our opportunity is to give ourselves permission within our window of feeling safe, right? To just start exploring. And my suggestion would be to do this with very small increments. You're not jumping from being over here, like in whatever land you're in here, to going way over to some loud, intense, dark, deep, whatever. You're just going slowly, giving yourself permission to try something new. It can be something internal, standing in a line to buy a ticket for something, and visually looking at someone, going, what do I like about what my eyes see? Outside of what their gender is. Or if you've always been a visual person, keeping your eyes closed and listening to the environment you're in, like, oh, what sounds fill my body with pleasure or joy? How does my body even communicate to me it's feeling pleasure or joy? Like, is that just a genital thing? Is it something my skin does? Do I blush? Do I feel hot? So it's a whole thing, John. And I haven't made that simple for everyone by saying step 1, step 2, step 3. But equally, it's like, how playful or inquisitive could we be about this part of ourselves?
What I really like in what you've just done is that you've made it embodied. I think that's so important. In one of the earlier episodes, I had a conversation with a woman called Viv Grant, and one of the main topics we talked about was race. And we talked about how race gets over-intellectualized. There's loads of books on race, on racism, and Viv was putting forward that really the work in relation to race and whiteness is about, it's embodied. It's about really looking at yourself, and you need to be in your body when you're doing that work. You can't do it by reading a book. I think that's what you've just said there, is that actually the exploration, because it involves all of your senses, because it's so personal to each person, invite people to explore that in an embodied way is a really nice way to explore it.
Yeah, because we live in a very cerebral culture, don't we? So it's not surprising that we default to the reading the book and sort of trying to understand it here. And I suppose maybe that's what I was getting back to at the beginning when I said about the first time that I was attracted to a woman. Maybe there's a mix that's needed, because I could feel something, or I had a sense of something, but I didn't sort of understand it. So what I'm saying is, go in with the intention of like being open to feeling different sensations. And when you go in with that intention, then the meaning becomes clear pretty quick. Whereas I didn't have that intention. I was actually sitting in church, and it was the pastor, who happened to be a woman in the church I was there. I had this very long history of religious, actually trauma, really. But I love the fact that my first queer experience was sitting in a hard wooden pew in an Anglican church somewhere in Melbourne. It feels good.
Oh, thank you so much for this conversation, Sarah. It's been so enlivening for me to talk about this with you. I'm curious about what question you might have for our next guest.
Ooh, I hadn't had anything planned, but something has come up. Straight away, It needs to be about the body, actually, John. And the question is, what has your body taught you recently that you didn't know? So it's the question is something like, we're going along in life and our body gives us a sensation or an experience that teaches us something. What has been one of those things for you?
Nice. Thank you so much. So that will be episode 1, season 2, because this is our final episode. And I'll tag you when the episode gets published so you can hear the answer.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to that.
So good talking to you, Sarah.
Thanks, John. Likewise.
Thank you for listening. I'm curious about what this conversation has stimulated for you. thoughts, feelings, curiosity. If this episode intrigued you, hit follow to be notified about new episodes. I know these conversations are valuable to me, and if you think they're valuable too, please do leave a review. Leaving a review allows more people to discover the podcast. You can scroll down to ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and click write a review. You can also connect with Becoming You on Instagram and TikTok by searching the handle at becoming_you__. The links are in the show notes too. You can also visit www.becomingyou.ie to explore the idea of becoming yourself. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.